I want you to just picture something for a second. And I'm betting it's going to feel incredibly, maybe even uncomfortably familiar. You are sitting on your couch at the end of a long day.
Oh, we all know this exact feeling.
Right. Like the TV is on, but you aren't really watching it. Your phone is just resting in your hand and it's buzzing, constantly buzzing, push notification after push
It's just
notification.
endless noise.
Exactly. One is, a breaking news alert about the latest political outrage, and it's a headline that is specifically engineered down to the exact choice of adjectives to just make your blood boil.
Yep, the outrage machine working as intended.
And then the next one is an email from your boss pinging you at 8:00 p.m. about a project that is suddenly inexplicably urgent. Then you mindlessly open a social media app, and immediately you're hit with this highly curated, impossibly perfect image of someone else's life.
Which is just a subtle little reminder of what you aren't doing right.
Exactly. What you don't have, what you haven't achieved, what you aren't buying. And as you sit there, just kind of illuminated by the glow of the screen, you feel this knot forming in your stomach.
The deep existential knot.
Yeah, it's this exhausting, pervasive sense that you are constantly running on a treadmill just to survive, just to keep up with the demands, the arguments, the endless consumption.
It really is the defining feeling of modern life, I think. That overwhelming bone-deep exhaustion that it doesn't go away after a good night's sleep.
No, it doesn't. And I mean, the standard diagnosis we give ourselves for this feeling is burnout. We tell ourselves, I just need a vacation, or I need to unplug for a weekend, or maybe we just need a different political party in charge to fix the country, and then I'll finally be able to exhale.
Which is such a surface-level way of looking at it.
Right, because what if we are completely misdiagnosing the problem here? What if this constant grinding cycle of outrage and consumption and exhaustion isn't just a byproduct of modern capitalism or bad politics? What if it is actually a new form of religious devotion?
I mean, that is a staggering reframing of how we view our daily reality. To look at our stress and our political anger not as some psychological failing, but as a misplaced spiritual practice.
It changes everything. It really does. And that brings us to our mission for this deep dive. We are exploring a dense, highly provocative, and just deeply philosophical text titled The Corruption of the Faithful.
It's a fascinating read.
It really is. The core argument this author makes is that human beings have this hardwired evolutionary need for faith and meaning. But as traditional religions have lost their central place in public life over the last few centuries, that human need didn't just evaporate.
No, it just found new outlets.
Exactly, it was hijacked. The author argues that traditional religions have been replaced by toxic new faiths, political ideology, extreme capitalism, and perpetual cultural conflict. Essentially, we haven't stopped being religious, we've just changed what we worship. And the new gods are incredibly demanding.
They are. And before we really plunge into the architecture of this idea, it is crucial to lay down some firm boundaries for this deep dive.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the text we are unpacking today tackles some highly charged political, social, and economic concepts. It levels these blistering structural critiques at both the left and the right wings of modern politics.
Everyone gets critiqued here.
Everyone. So as your guides through this material, we are not taking sides. We are not endorsing any specific political viewpoint or policy.
Wait, we're totally neutral here.
Our goal is simply to impartially unpack the author's fascinating overarching theory on how systems of power corrupt human meaning completely, regardless of political affiliation. We are just looking at the mechanics of belief itself.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to understand the absolute chaos of today, to understand why you feel that knot in your stomach on the couch, we really have to understand what we replaced. We need to look at the original blueprint.
We have to go way back.
Yeah, take us back to the very beginning. Historically speaking, how did humanity originally link the concept of political power to the divine?
Well, to understand the modern spiritual void, we have to look at how tightly woven faith and governance used to be. For the vast majority of human history, political power didn't just align with religion. It claimed to be the direct, literal manifestation of it.
Like they were basically one and the same.
Exactly. Let's look at ancient Egypt, for example. They operated under this fundamental concept called Mot.
Mot. Okay, what did that actually look like in the day-to-day life of an ancient Egyptian?
So Mot represented cosmic order, truth, and justice. It was the fundamental balance of the universe. And the pharaoh wasn't just, a chief executive or a military commander. The pharaoh was viewed as a divine figure whose literal job was to uphold Ma'at on earth.
Wow, so no pressure there.
Right, and this wasn't abstract at all. If the Nile River flooded properly, depositing the silt they needed for crops, and the harvests were good, it was because the pharaoh was successfully maintaining that cosmic balance. If there was a drought, it meant the cosmic order was threatened.
So channeling that perspective, challenging the pharaoh, wasn't just some political rebellion.
Not at all.
If you organized a protest against the pharaoh, you weren't just committing treason, you were threatening the fabric of the universe itself. You were bringing chaos into the natural order.
You see the exact same psychological mechanism in ancient Mesopotamia, too. Think of the Code of Hammurabi. It's one of the oldest deciphered writings of significant length in the world.
Right, the big stone pillar.
Yeah, the massive diorite steel where these laws are carved.
Huh.
Now, imagine standing in front of it. At the very top, there's a carving of King Hammurabi. But he isn't writing the laws. He is depicted receiving the laws directly from the hands of Shamash, the Mesopotamian sun god of justice.
I mean, honestly, it's a brilliant PR move.
It really is.
The message to the citizens walking past that stone is undeniable. These aren't just rules Hammurabi thought up over the weekend because he wanted higher taxes. These are the dictates of heaven.
And the implication is profound. To break the law was to commit a sin. To steal wasn't just a crime against your neighbor, it was a literal insult to the sun god.
That is heavy.
And we see a different but equally powerful version of this in the early Hebrew tradition. Early Israel operated under a covenantal theocracy. God was the ultimate, literal ruler, and earthly kings were only considered legitimate so long as they upheld the divine law, the Torah.
And that's where the prophets come in, right?
Exactly. Prophets existed outside the political hierarchy specifically to hold the kings accountable to that higher power.
It's just an incredibly effective system for maintaining societal order. You don't just fear the king's guards catching you. You fear eternal damnation or cosmic wrath. It polices the mind, not just the body.
And this didn't end in antiquity either.
Right. This mechanism carries right on through to the Middle Ages in Europe.
It culminates in the doctrine of the divine right of kings. The defining historical image here happens on Christmas Day in the year 800 AD.
Oh, this is a great moment.
Pope Leo III is in Rome, and he places a crown on the head of Charlemagne, declaring him Emperor of the Romans.
Let's pause on that moment because I want to picture the tension in that room. Charlemagne already had the armies, right? He had the land. He had the sheer brute political power. What did a crown from the Pope actually give him that his swords couldn't?
It gave him sacred validation. Armies can conquer land, but they can't conquer the soul's allegiance. By having the Pope, the vicar of Christ on earth, crown him, Charlemagne gained a mandate from heaven.
So nobody could question his authority without questioning God.
Precisely. For centuries after that moment, European monarchs claimed they answered only to God, not to their subjects, not to parliaments. The church legitimized the state, and in return, the state protected the church's monopolies and wealth.
It's quite the mutually beneficial arrangement.
Very much so. In this framework, treason and heresy are virtually the identical crime.
Right.
You plot against the king, you are plotting against God's appointed steward.
But then the script finally flips. Fast forward to the Enlightenment, you have thinkers coming along who look at the setup and say, wait a minute, this is a terrible idea.
The Enlightenment thinkers were looking at the absolute wreckage of Europe. The continent had just spent centuries tearing itself apart in incredibly bloody religious wars.
Like the 30 Years' War.
Exactly, where millions died over sectarian differences intertwined with political ambitions. So thinkers like John Locke began arguing for the consent of the governed, rather than divine mandate. Voltaire started relentlessly mocking the corruption and hypocrisy of the clergy.
And Kant had that famous phrase.
Immanuel Kant, yes. He issued the rallying cry of the era sapere aude. Dare to know. Have the courage to use your own reason, rather than relying on the dogmas handed down by priests and kings.
They basically wanted to amputate the church from the state. They proposed this radical new idea, a secular state that is entirely neutral in matters of faith. And the text points out that we see early, kind of imperfect experiments of this in the Dutch Golden Age of the 17th century.
The Dutch Republic became this incredible haven for free thought, scientific inquiry, and religious tolerance.
Because they figured out that religious persecution was just bad for business.
Yeah, exactly. If you want a booming port city, you can't be burning the merchants at the stake over theological disagreements. Amsterdam became the intellectual sanctuary of Europe.
But the author of our source material points out a massive, very dark contradiction here that really sets up the rest of the book. The Dutch Golden Age was a haven for free thought at home, but that immense prosperity was built on the incredible brutality of the Dutch East India Company abroad.
They were essentially a mega corporation with its own military.
Right. It exposes the early cracks in this new enlightened secularism. They were preaching universal human rights and reason in the coffee houses of Amsterdam, while simultaneously practicing slavery, colonial exploitation, and violent monopolization in Asia and the Americas.
It's a vital point because it proves that human cognition and morality are heavily, sometimes entirely, dictated by power structures.
So removing the divine mandate didn't actually fix human nature.
Removing the divine mandate didn't automatically make rulers perfectly just or societies perfectly ethical. In many cases, it simply provided them with new, secular justifications for exploitation. They would say, we aren't conquering them in the name of God. We are conquering them in the name of commerce and civilization.
That brings us to the ultimate explosive test of this whole idea of replacing religion with secular reason. Let's talk about the French Revolution. This is such a wild, chaotic period of history.
It's completely chaotic.
The French revolutionaries didn't just want to separate church and state. They wanted to utterly dismantle the Catholic Church's grip on the French mind. They changed the calendar. They stripped the clergy of their power. But, and this is the crux of the author's argument, while they could dismantle the institution, they completely failed to dismantle the human psychological need to worship something.
Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does the human soul. When the revolutionaries physically tore down the altars of Catholicism, they found they had to build new ones to keep the society cohesive.
So what did they do?
In 1793, they literally created a new, state-sponsored atheistic religion called the Cult of Reason.
I really want to emphasize how bizarre and theatrical this was. They didn't just write some new laws. They took over Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, the most iconic religious building in the country.
They stripped it of Christian iconography,
Renamed it the Temple of Reason, and held a massive festival. And they literally hired a local actress, dressed her up in Roman robes, and paraded her around the cathedral as the goddess of reason.
It sounds made up, but it's historical fact.
They replaced hymns to God with hymns to liberty. They built a fake mountain inside the church. It was a complete point-for-point substitution of religious ritual.
And you have to ask why. Because humans are ritualistic creatures. We need collective ceremonies to bind us together.
I have to push back here, though, just playing devil's advocate for a second. Even if the Cult of Reason was a bit theatrical, maybe even a little silly with the fake mountain and the actress, isn't elevating concepts like reason and liberty inherently better, or at least safer, than demanding blind faith in an invisible deity and a corrupt monarch? At least they are worshiping something rational.
That is the logical assumption, of course. But history provided a horrific counter-argument, and the author dwells heavily on this. The dark irony of the Cult of Reason is that it almost immediately devolved into the Reign of Terror under Maximilien Robespierre.
Things got very dark, very fast.
The revolutionaries set out to build a flawless utopia based purely on logic, equality, and civic virtue. But human beings are messy. When people inevitably didn't conform perfectly to this new, rational utopia, when they hoarded grain or expressed doubt about the leadership or just didn't show enough enthusiasm, the leaders didn't respond with reasoned debate in a town square.
They responded with the guillotine.
They responded with the guillotine.
So the guillotine basically became the new altar of sacrifice.
Exactly. Tens of thousands of people were executed.
Yeah.
And the church wasn't usually a specific crime. It was lacking revolutionary fervor.
Which is just the secular equivalent of lacking faith. So they just swapped out the vocabulary. Instead of executing heretics for crimes against God, they executed traitors for crimes against reason and the Republic. The blood still flowed, the head still rolled, but the paperwork just had a different letterhead.
The French Revolution proved a terrifying point that anchors this entire deep dive. When you kill the old gods, humans don't suddenly become purely rational, emotionless, calculating beings. They just invent new gods. And secular dogmas, when they are given absolute power, can be just as bloody, just as uncompromising, and just as fanatical as the religious dogmas they replace.
That perfectly transitions us into the 20th century. If the French Revolution was the beta test for a political religion, the 19th and 20th centuries scaled that prototype up to a global, catastrophic level. We move from the cult of reason to the massive totalizing ideologies of the modern era.
The author outlines how the great isms of the 20th century, communism, fascism, and extreme nationalism, stepped directly into the spiritual void left by the decline of traditional faith in the West.
Let's look closely at communism first.
Karl Marx famously called religion the opiate of the masses. He argued it was an illusion designed by the ruling class to drug the working class into accepting their suffering, promising them a reward in the afterlife so they wouldn't revolt in this life. The stated goal of Marxism was a society based on scientific, dialectical materialism.
Hold on, dialectical materialism is one of those dense academic phrases that gets thrown around a lot. For anyone who hasn't read Marx recently or ever, what does that actually mean in practice?
In simple terms, it's the idea that history isn't driven by gods or ideas or great men. History is driven purely by material, economic forces, specifically the conflict between different social classes over resources.
Okay, so it's all about the money and resources.
Right. And the dialectical part means that progress happens through conflict. A status quo exists, a rebellion challenges it, and out of that clash, a new societal stage is born. Marx believed this was a hard science, as predictable as physics. He believed society would inevitably evolve toward a stateless, classless utopia.
But despite claiming to be a hard science that hated religion, the text argues that communism functioned exactly like the religions it was actively trying to destroy.
Look at the structural parallels. They are undeniable. Communism offered a Genesis story. The history of the world is the history of class struggle. It offered a promised heaven, the future classless utopia where all suffering ends and everyone is equal.
And it had its infallible prophets, right?
Lenin, Stalin, Mao. Their writings were treated as unquestionable sacred texts. You couldn't debate Das Kapital, you could only interpret it.
And, most dangerously, it had its heretics.
The class enemies, the dissidents, the wreckers, the kulaks, they had to be purged or sent to gulags. And the crucial point here is that under these regimes, you didn't just have to obey the Communist Party. You had to believe in it with your whole heart.
You had to perform your faith.
You had to confess your ideological sins in public show trials. It demanded the total surrender of the individual soul to the collective.
And if we look at the opposite end of the political spectrum, fascism was doing the exact same thing, just with a different aesthetic.
Fascism was a reactionary faith. It worshipped hierarchy, military strength, and national rebirth. Mussolini in Italy actually encouraged people to view fascism as religion. His catechism for the citizens was believe, obey, fight.
Notice the order there. Believe comes first.
In Nazi Germany, the regime deliberately co-opted deep religious impulses to sacralize the Aryan race. They recognized the power of Christian rituals and tried to hijack them.
Like trying to substitute Christmas with a pagan winter solstice festival?
Yes, and if you look at the mass rallies at Nuremberg, they weren't political conventions in the modern sense. Observers at the time described them as having the intense fervor of a religious revival meeting. The massive columns of light, the synchronized chanting, the iconography.
Hitler was worshipped with a literal messianic zeal. He was the savior come to redeem the fallen nation.
Exactly.
The author also brings nationalism into this framework, which I found really interesting because nationalism feels so normal to us today. It doesn't feel like a radical ideology. It just feels like patriotism. But the text references the scholar Benedict Anderson, who called the nation an imagined community.
Think about what a nation actually is. You will never meet 99.9% of your fellow citizens. You don't know their names, you don't know their lives, yet you feel a profound, almost sacred bond with them.
It's true. If your nation's team wins the Olympics, you feel a personal triumph.
If your nation is attacked, you feel personally violated. We treat the abstract concept of the nation like a deity.
We really do. I mean, we have national anthems that function exactly like hymns. We pledge allegiance to a piece of cloth. And crucially, we treat war memorials and tombs of the unknown soldier as secular shrines. We speak in hushed tones around them.
The author argues that nationalism uses collective trauma, the memory of past wars and sacrifices, to bind people together. It demands a level of sacrifice, literally giving your life for the country, that only a religion could historically demand.
To really drill down into why human beings are so susceptible to this, the source material brings in Eric Hoffer's brilliant concept from his 1951 book, The True Believer. Hoffer looked at mass movements, whether they were early Christian, communist, or fascist, and realized they all attract the exact same personality type.
The true believer.
Right. And the true believer isn't drawn to the specific details of the ideology, are they? They don't care about the nuances of tax policy or historical dialectic.
No, they are drawn to the absolute certainty the movement provides. Hoffer identified that these movements target people who feel alienated, frustrated, or lost in the modern world. People who feel their individual lives are meaningless or deeply flawed.
They want to lose themselves in something bigger.
They're desperate for a cause larger than themselves so they can dissolve their own personal anxieties into a collective identity. They want a charismatic leader to tell them who the enemy is, what the glorious goal is, and to assure them that they are on the righteous side of history.
I want to introduce an analogy here because it really helped me conceptualize this shift. Imagine human society is a massive house. For centuries, traditional religion acted as the load-bearing walls of that house.
Okay, I like this.
It provided the structure, the boundaries, the rules of the house, and the shelter from the existential storm outside. Then, modernity comes along. Science, the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, and we decide we don't like those old load-bearing walls anymore. They feel restrictive. So we knock down the walls of religion, and we try to replace them with the drywall of political ideology.
Drywall looks fantastic. It partitions the room exactly how you want it. You can paint it any color, but it fundamentally lacks the structural integrity to hold the weight of the roof.
Yes, drywall cannot hold the weight of human existential dread. It cannot answer the questions of why do we suffer or what happens when we die. We are asking political systems, which are designed to manage taxes, roads, and laws, to do the heavy lifting of a religion.
We're asking them to provide us with ultimate meaning, community, and salvation.
And they just aren't built for it. Eventually, the roof caves in.
And that cave-in is the transition to the 21st century. These 20th century mass movements provided a profound, violent sense of meaning in a rapidly modernizing, increasingly alienating world. But the price of admission was total submission.
They set the stage for everything happening today.
They set the psychological blueprint for the ideological tribalism we are experiencing right now. We learned how to worship the state, the party, and the nation. And that paved the way for something even more destabilizing, the collapse of shared reality itself.
Which moves our deep dive into one of the most chilling concepts in the text, the shattered logos and the war of narratives. If the 20th century was defined by physical wars between clashing political religions like armies marching across borders, the 21st century is defined by an invisible war over reality itself.
We need to define what the author means by the logos. In classical Greek philosophy, and later adopted into Christian theology, the logos was the idea of a divine, rational order to the universe.
The ultimate truth.
It was the word, the ultimate reason. It meant there was an objective truth, a bedrock of reality that humans could discover through reason, science, or faith. The universe made sense, even if we didn't fully understand it yet. The author argues that today, the logos is shattered, that bedrock is gone.
So what replaces it?
Truth is no longer something we collectively discover. It is something that is assigned by whoever holds power.
The text actually traces the origins of this back to ancient Greece, to Plato's warnings about sophistry.
The sophists were essentially the world's first spin doctors. They were traveling teachers who taught young men how to use rhetoric and public speaking. But Plato hated them because they didn't care about objective truth.
They just wanted to win the argument.
Exactly. They taught people how to use linguistic tricks to make the weaker argument look stronger. They cared entirely about winning the debate and gaining power. They created a fake reality through language.
And this philosophical shift accelerates with Friedrich Nietzsche in the late 19th century. Nietzsche famously declared, "There are no facts, only interpretations." Now, we have to be fair to Nietzsche here. He intended this to be liberating.
He was fighting against rigid dogmas.
Right. He looked at the oppressive dogmas of Victorian society and the church, and he wanted to free humanity to forge their own values. He wanted to encourage radical critical thinking.
But the author points out that in our modern post-truth era, Nietzsche's liberating idea has been hijacked and weaponized. If there are truly no facts, only interpretations, then anyone's narrative is just as valid as anyone else's.
It's a slippery slope.
And if everything is relative, if there is no objective logos, then truth is just a matter of who has the biggest megaphone. It becomes purely about power.
Or, in our world, who has the best algorithm? And this is where the corruption of language comes in. The author leans heavily on George Orwell's 1984 and the concept of newspeak.
A classic text for this kind of analysis.
In the novel, the totalitarian regime systematically shrinks the vocabulary of the English language. The goal is that rebellious thoughts literally cannot be formed in the human brain because the words to express them no longer exist. Today, the text argues, we are seeing language hollowed out from the inside.
It's a brilliant observation. The author notes how modern political and social movements redefine fundamental words to mean their exact opposite or to mean whatever is politically convenient for the faction in that given moment.
Give us an example of that.
Think about how the word freedom is sometimes subtly redefined as obedience to the collective good, or how justice is redefined not as equal treatment under the law, but as vengeance against a historical oppressor, or how tolerance is redefined as demanding absolute conformity to a specific ideological worldview.
When words can mean anything depending on who is speaking, they mean nothing. You can't have a debate with your neighbor if you don't agree on the definition of the words coming out of your mouth.
It's impossible.
But here's where it gets really interesting. We aren't just dealing with human spin doctors or sophists anymore. We have introduced a massive, unpredictable wild card into this war of narratives artificial intelligence.
AI has the ability to scale up the corruption of reality to a level Orwell couldn't have even hallucinated.
I want to spend some time on this because it's crucial. How exactly does an algorithm dictate reality? Let's break down the mechanics. The algorithms that run our social media feeds are not designed to inform us. They are mathematically optimized for one thing: engagement, time on site.
And human psychology dictates that we engage most with things that trigger our amygdala: fear, anger, and moral outrage.
It's hardwired into us.
So the algorithm quickly learns that showing you a nuanced, balanced article about a complex policy gets a 2-second glance. But showing you a video of someone from the opposing political tribe doing something enraging gets a 5-minute watch time, 3 angry comments, and a share.
So it just feeds you more of that. It creates these filter bubbles. You are only seeing information that confirms your pre-existing biases and enrages you about the other side. You literally live in a different informational reality from the neighbor living next door to you.
And worse than that, we have AI bots flooding the internet with synthetic consensus.
This is the black box gaslighting the text refers to. You look at a trending topic and you see 10,000 furious comments. It looks like the whole world is angry about this one specific thing.
But a massive percentage of those comments might be generated by automated bot farms designed to sow discord.
It's like playing a massive multiplayer sport where the referee is secretly changing the rule book depending on who is watching. And half the players on the field aren't even human. They are holograms programmed to start fistfights in the stands.
What is truly fascinating and terrifying here is that the author insists this resulting confusion is not a glitch in the system. It is the goal.
Wait, really? The confusion is the point.
Yes. Manufactured confusion is a primary strategy of control. Think about it practically. If the public cannot agree on basic, verifiable facts, if we are constantly arguing over what a word means, or whether a video is real or a deepfake, or what happened yesterday, we are paralyzed.
We can't act if we can't agree on what's real.
An exhausted, confused, polarized public is incredibly easy to manage. They are too busy fighting each other over algorithmic shadows on the wall to ever turn around and see who is casting the shadows.
It's exhausting just talking about it. So let's put ourselves in the shoes of the average person. With reality shattered, with words losing their meaning, and with people drowning in this algorithmic noise, how do we cope? The author argues that we cope by clinging to rigid, totalizing ideologies. We embrace the theology of the masses.
Because, again, the human need for meaning doesn't disappear just because the logos is shattered. When people feel completely unmoored, they seek out structures that tell them exactly who they are, who the enemy is, and how to be righteous.
And the text explicitly applies this to extreme movements on both the left and the right, correct?
Yes, on both sides. The author argues that modern sociopolitical movements now function as new theocracies.
This is a deeply provocative framework. I want us to organically discover how these modern ideologies mimic religious structures. Let's start at the beginning of a religious journey. In traditional Christianity, you are born with original sin, the stain of Adam and Eve. You enter the world already flawed. How does that translate to modern political theology?
In these new ideological faiths, original sin is framed as inherent privilege or historical guilt, or belonging to the wrong demographic, class, or political geography. It is a moral taint you carry from birth.
So it's not about what you've done.
Exactly. It's not about what you individually have done. It's about what you represent. And just like original sin, it is something you must constantly acknowledge and apologize for.
Okay, so if I have this modern original sin, how do I get forgiven? In Catholicism, you go to confession, you do penance, you are absolved. What is the mechanism for redemption here?
The crucial difference is that in the new theologies, it's an endless, impossible redemption. Redemption is achieved through perpetual activism, through constantly proving your loyalty to the cause.
So you can never just be done.
Right, because the movement thrives on maintaining conflict and moving the goalposts. You are never fully absolved. You can never say, I've done enough, I am a good person now. You must always do more.
And how do you prove you are doing more? Religions have sacraments, public rituals like communion or baptism. What are the modern political sacraments?
Sacraments in this context are public rituals of purity. It is virtue signaling on social media. It's putting the correct slogans in your bio. It's consuming the right media and publicly boycotting the wrong brands.
Listen to performance.
It is using the exact, correct, ever-changing terminology to prove you are initiated into the current dogma. It is public performance to prove to the rest of the congregation that you are devout.
And finally, what happens if I question all this? In the old days, that was heresy.
Heresy remains the ultimate crime. But heresy today isn't denying the virgin birth. Heresy is expressing doubt about the prevailing narrative.
Just asking a question can be heresy.
It is asking a nuanced question in a digital space that demands absolute black and white certainty. And the punishment for heresy isn't hell in the afterlife. It is immediate excommunication in the present. It's being canceled, unpersoned, having your livelihood threatened, and being driven out of the digital community.
The author uses a really intense metaphor for this process, breeding demons. In the old days, humanity feared supernatural monsters. We feared witches or spirits or literal demons lurking in the dark woods. Today, ideology teaches us that our fellow citizens are the monsters.
To illustrate this, the text explicitly references Fyodor Dostoevsky's classic 1872 novel Demons, which is sometimes translated as The Possessed. Dostoevsky was writing about 19th century Russian radicals, these young intellectuals who were obsessed with bringing down the state.
What was his main point with that book?
He wanted to show how abstract intellectual ideologies can literally possess the human mind, exactly like a demonic possession.
How does an idea possess someone? What does that actually look like in practice?
When an ideology fully possesses you, it rewrites your internal operating system. It strips away your individual compassion, your ability to see nuance, and your basic human empathy for anyone outside your group.
It makes you cold.
It replaces those things with cold, absolute fanaticism. The ideology tells you that the utopian goal is so vital, so supremely important, that any action taken to achieve it is morally justified.
You stop seeing people as complex individuals with families and struggles, and you start seeing them entirely as avatars of an opposing ideology. You turn them into demons.
And once you've convinced yourself that someone is a literal demon standing in the way of utopia, any cruelty committed against them isn't just justified. Cruelty becomes a moral imperative. You feel righteous while destroying them.
The brilliance of the system is that it doesn't need to create external enemies to keep the population distracted. It turns its own citizens into enemies of each other. The masses become their own tormentors and executioners.
It's a self-sustaining cycle of misery.
But I have to ask the fundamental question here. Why do people willingly participate in this? Think about your own feed. We wake up, we log on, and we jump right back into this endless cycle of outrage, canceling, and ideological warfare. It makes us miserable. So what on earth do we get out of it?
The author provides a haunting answer. The hunger of the people. The masses are starved for deep, genuine meaning. We no longer have the cosmic order of the pharaohs or the unquestionable framework of the church.
We're empty inside.
In the absence of true spiritual fulfillment, people consume outrage and conflict to try and fill the void.
Outrage feels like purpose. Anger feels like you are actually doing something, even if you are just typing on a screen.
Exactly. But the system is designed to ensure that this hunger is never actually satisfied. It's like drinking salt water when you are thirsty.
The more you drink, the thirstier you get.
If people were deeply fulfilled, they would rest. A resting content populace is harder to manipulate and harder to monetize. So the system ensures the outrage machine runs perpetually, feeding the masses empty calories of anger so they stay addicted to the struggle.
That is incredibly bleak, but we have to push further because it gets even more complex. It isn't just political ideology that is rushed in to fill this spiritual void. The author argues that the market itself has been elevated to a divine status, capitalism as the new god.
To understand how commerce became a religion, The text looks back to the sociologist Max Weber and his famous theory on the Protestant work ethic. Weber argued that modern capitalism wasn't just born out of technological advancement. It was actually birthed by intense religious devotion.
Let's unpack that, because linking extreme capitalism to religious devotion seems pretty counterintuitive today. How did that work?
It goes back to the early days of Protestantism, particularly Calvinism. John Calvin preached the doctrine of predestination.
That's the idea that your fate is sealed before you're born, right?
Yes, the idea that God had already decided who was going to heaven and who was going to hell before they were even born, and you couldn't change it. Now, psychologically, this created immense anxiety. People wanted a sign that they were among the elect, the chosen ones.
Naturally, if I can't earn my salvation, I at least want a hint that I'm on the winning team.
And the sign they settled on was worldly success through hard work. They believed that working incredibly hard, being meticulously frugal, and accumulating wealth were signs of God's favor.
So working hard was a religious duty.
Labor was a form of prayer. Idleness was a sin. They reinvested their money rather than spending it on frivolous luxury. This ascetic, hyper-focused religious drive is what accumulated the massive capital that kicked off modern capitalism.
But Weber notes a tragedy here, doesn't he?
He does. Over time, as societies secularized, the religious motivation completely faded away. But the obsession with work, efficiency, and accumulation remained.
We kept the habit but lost the reason for it.
Weber famously said the early Protestant wore their devotion like a light cloak that could be cast aside, but for modern man, it eventually hardened into an iron cage.
The iron cage of forced labor, rigid routine, and endless metric-driven competition. We lost the spiritual purpose but kept the punishing work ethic. We are trapped in a system of production that no longer serves a higher calling, but only serves its own expansion.
And the author combines this with Karl Marx's concept of alienation to show the psychological toll of this cage.
Let's talk about alienation. Picture a traditional craftsman, maybe a shoemaker in a pre-industrial village. He buys the leather, he designs the shoe, he sews it, he sells it to his neighbor, and he sees his neighbor wearing it. He is deeply connected to his labor.
Now compare that to a worker on an assembly line in the 19th century, or a data entry clerk in a cubicle today. Marx argued that the relentless focus of capitalism on producing commodities alienates the worker.
We just become cogs in a machine.
We become separated from the products of our labor. We just pull a lever or type numbers all day. We become alienated from each other, viewing colleagues as competitors. And ultimately, we become alienated from our own souls. Our labor isn't an expression of our humanity. It's just a raw commodity we sell to survive.
Weber called this the disenchantment of the world. The magic, the mystery, the sacredness of life is stripped away. Everything. Nature, human relationships, art, time itself is reduced to a calculable metric of profit and loss.
And yet, because human beings are fundamentally religious creatures who need to worship, we couldn't just live in a purely transactional world. So we turned capitalism itself into a theology.
The text calls it the gospel of endless growth.
Think about how our news anchors and politicians talk about the economy. We treat the market like an omniscient, invisible deity. We make sacrifices to appease the market. We pray for the market to rise.
We absolutely do. And the text points out how this creates a modern prosperity gospel. It's the implicit, deeply ingrained belief that wealth is a sign of moral virtue and poverty is a sign of moral failing.
It's a very harsh way to view the world.
It is. If you are poor in the system, it's not viewed as a systemic issue or bad luck. It's framed as a personal sin. You just didn't work hard enough, or you didn't optimize your morning routine, or you didn't manifest it.
This leads to the complete commodification of the soul. The text brings up this brilliant concept by the author Ronald Purser called McMindfulness. It perfectly illustrates how capitalism consumes even our attempts to escape it.
Oh, I love this example. Let's walk through it. You take an ancient, profound spiritual practice like Buddhist mindfulness. Historically, mindfulness was designed to liberate you from worldly attachments, to dissolve the ego, and to build deep, radical ethical compassion for all living things. It was a rigorous philosophical way of life.
But modern corporate capitalism looks at mindfulness, strips all the ethics, the philosophy, and the community out of it, and packages it into a 10-minute app meditation.
Right, with a monthly subscription fee.
Corporate HR departments push it on you not to liberate you, but so you can lower your blood pressure just enough to get back to your spreadsheet without having a panic attack. They want you to be a contented, mindful capitalist. They sell you the cure to the stress that their system explicitly created.
It is the ultimate consumerist sacrament. Even your spiritual life, your inner peace, is something to be optimized for productivity. The author points back to the Dutch tulip mania of the 17th century as a historical metaphor for this kind of mass economic delusion.
Tulip mania is fascinating. In the 1630s in the Netherlands, people started trading their houses, their land, and their life savings for single tulip bulbs.
For flowers.
For flowers. Why? Because everyone collectively agreed they had astronomical value. It was a mass delusion, a fragile reality created purely by speculative faith. The text argues that much of our modern identity and economy operates on this same fragile speculative faith.
We chase status symbols, follower counts, and brand names that have no intrinsic value, purely because we believe the collective delusion. Think about your own habits. Think about modern mega malls or the endless scrolling ecosystem of Amazon and Instagram shopping. They really are cathedrals of consumption. They are beautifully lit, they have mesmerizing music. They are designed by architects to induce a sense of awe, aspiration, and slight disorientation.
You're supposed to lose track of time in there.
We go to them, whether physically or digitally, seeking a kind of redemption. We feel empty or sad or alienated, so we buy a new outfit or a new gadget, hoping it will make us feel whole. We are participating in a religious ritual, but the redemption lasts about 5 minutes after the package arrives, and we just leave with credit card debt.
And if you look at the architecture of belief, the author argues that in this new religion, debt has replaced sin.
Debt has replaced sin.
You are born into a system where you must take on massive financial debt just to get an education or a car or a home or even medical care. You are inherently in deficit from the moment you become an adult.
It's like original financial sin.
Precisely. And this keeps you infinitely tied to the market. You can never stop running on the treadmill because you have to service the debt. You can never rebel because you have a mortgage. Your identity itself is no longer something you discover internally through deep reflection. It is a brand that you curate through the products you buy and market to others on social media.
So let's zoom out for a second. If the masses are trapped down here in the lower decks in this endless loop-fighting proxy wars over a political ideology on social media, trying to buy spiritual fulfillment through an app, and drowning in structural debt, who is actually running the system? Who benefits from all this?
That brings us to the most structural part of the author's critique, the devouring class and the end of democracy.
The author paints a very stark, unflinching picture of the modern elite. They were termed the devouring class because, unlike the industrialists of the 19th and 20th centuries who, despite their many flaws and exploitations, at least built physical infrastructure, bridges, and factories, this new class primarily extracts.
They don't build. They harvest. They financialize. The text breaks them down into 3 distinct factions.
Let's organically explore how these factions operate. First, you have the corporate lords. How are they extracting value from the average person's daily life?
The corporate lords are engineering what the author terms subscription feudalism. Think about how ownership has fundamentally changed in the last decade. The goal is that you will own absolutely nothing.
You'll just rent your life.
You will rent your software, your entertainment, your transportation, your housing. You lease your phone. You subscribe to your heated car seats. You pay a perpetual tax just for access to the basic tools of your own life. You are effectively a digital serf tilling the land of their massive tech platforms, and they take a cut of every crop you produce.
Second, you have the political priests. What is their role in this system?
These are the politicians, cable news pundits, and the media figures who manage the theater of the culture war. Their specific job is to keep the public emotionally enraged, but politically powerless.
So they're the ones feeding the outrage machine.
They ensure that all our anger is directed horizontally at each other over social issues, rather than directed upward at the economic structures that are extracting our wealth.
And third, you have the untouchable few.
This is the ultra-wealthy elite, who are fully aware that the current system is environmentally and economically unsustainable. The math doesn't work long-term. But rather than trying to fix it, which would require giving up power, they are hoarding staggering amounts of wealth and literally buying remote land and luxury bunkers.
They are preparing to escape the collapse that they themselves are profiting from engineering.
Exactly.
And this leads to what the author calls the end of democracy. Because if this devouring class holds all the real economic and narrative power, what is the point of a citizen going to the ballot box? The text references the political theorist Sheldon Woolen and his concept of inverted totalitarianism. I want to make sure we explain this clearly because it's a vital concept.
In classic totalitarianism, think of Orwell's 1984, or Stalin's Russia. The state rules from the top down, through overt terror, secret police, physical violence, and a charismatic dictator. It's visible and obvious. But Woolen argued that inverted totalitarianism is subtle.
It doesn't look like a dictatorship.
Right, the state rules through corporate power, media consolidation, and public demobilization.
So the aesthetic of democracy remains.
Yes. You still have elections, you still have a constitution, you still have opposing political parties. But the actual levers of power, monetary policy, foreign wars, corporate regulation are heavily insulated from the voters. The politicians serve the corporate interests first.
Voting just becomes a ritual of obedience.
A pressure valve to make the public feel like they have a say, when in reality, the major economic and geopolitical decisions are made by an entrenched consensus that doesn't significantly change regardless of which party is in office.
The text has a fascinating, if intensely depressing, take on how monetary policy fits into this control mechanism. We usually think of interest rates, inflation, and the Federal Reserve as just boring economic weather. It's just numbers on a screen.
But it's not.
But the author says it's actually how the system manages the distance between heaven and hell for the working class. How does that mechanism actually work?
Think of heaven in this context as true, debt-free prosperity and economic independence for the working class. If people have savings, they have leverage. They can strike, they can quit, they can demand better.
And what's hell?
Think of hell as total economic collapse, hyperinflation, and breadlines, which usually leads to violent revolution. The devouring class uses monetary policy, the printing of fiat currency, and the manipulation of interest rates to keep the public permanently suspended in purgatory.
Explain how inflation acts as a hidden mechanism of control.
Inflation is a hidden tax that doesn't require legislation. When a central bank prints more money, it dilutes the value of the money already in your pocket. It secretly confiscates the purchasing power of your savings.
So you might get a 3% raise at your job and you feel like you are moving forward, but the cost of groceries, housing, and energy goes up 6%.
So you are working harder, making a higher numerical salary, but you are actually falling further behind in real terms.
It keeps you running on the treadmill.
It keeps you just comfortable enough, just entertained enough by your screens that you don't pick up pitchforks and revolt. But you are kept too poor, too indebted, and too exhausted to ever be truly free or to structurally challenge the system.
So what does this all mean? Let me try a different analogy here, because the sinking ship cliche doesn't quite capture the intentionality of this. It's like we're all playing a massive multiplayer video game. We are entirely obsessed with fighting the opposing team in the arena.
We're so focused on the game.
We are screaming at each other, totally focused on the blue team versus red team mechanics. And because we are so distracted by the culture war happening on the screen, we don't realize that the server admins, the devouring class, are slowly draining our digital wallets, rewriting the code to make it harder to level up, and secretly preparing to shut down the servers entirely once they've cashed out.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. The devouring class does not specialize in building a sustainable future. They specialize in the management of collapse. They are extracting the final bits of value from the institutions of civilization before the whole thing buckles under its own contradictions.
Okay, I need a lifeline here. I really do. Because this diagnosis is incredibly dark. Is the author just a nihilist saying we are all totally doomed to be digital serfs?
Thankfully, no, we arrive at the pivot.
The text actually provides a comprehensive, actionable blueprint for how society, and us as individuals, can escape this iron cage. Let's look at the solutions, starting with reclaiming language and truth. If the war of narratives relies on a confused public, what is the systemic antidote?
The author points to aggressive, institutionalized media literacy. We aren't just talking hypotheticals. The text points to Finland as a highly successful real-world model. In Finland, media literacy isn't an elective you take in college. It is woven into the curriculum from primary school onward.
What does a class like that actually teach a 10-year-old?
Students are taught how to spot propaganda techniques. They analyze statistical manipulation in news reports. They are taught exactly how algorithms work, how deepfakes are made, and how to fact-check sources.
That's incredible.
By the time they're adults, they have an incredibly high societal immunity to fake news and algorithmic manipulation. We need to institutionalize this globally. The text also advocates for something called deliberative democracy forums to break the cycle of outrage.
How does a deliberative democracy forum differ from what we do now, which is mostly shouting slogans at each other on the internet?
They are structured, localized citizens' assemblies. You randomly select a representative group of citizens, people who vehemently disagree with each other, and you put them in a physical room. You provide them with expert testimony on a specific issue, say local zoning laws or healthcare.
And then what?
And then they're forced to actually talk to each other face to face. They hash out policies through actual messy dialogue over several days. Studies show that when people are forced into physical proximity and structured debate, the tribalism melts away, and they almost always find pragmatic compromises.
It rehumanizes the political process. And what about the economy? How do we stop capitalism from being our all-consuming god?
The author suggests we have to radically change the metrics of success. Right now, the only bottom line for a corporation is shareholder profit. The text argues we must mandate a triple bottom line for major corporations.
Which means they are judged on 3 distinct metrics.
Yes, profit is one. But they must also be legally judged and taxed on the well-being of people, how they treat their workers and their supply chains, and the health of the planet, their environmental impact.
So if a company is wildly profitable but destroys a local river and pays poverty wages, it is legally considered a failing enterprise under this model.
Exactly. The text also mentions right to repair laws and fighting throwaway culture, which I absolutely love. It's about building an economy based on durability rather than planned obsolescence. It shifts the mindset from endless consumption to stewardship.
But the biggest, perhaps most difficult societal shift has to be in education.
We have spent the last few decades turning our universities into glorified vocational schools. We focus purely on STEM and hyper-specialized job skills to serve the immediate needs of the corporate economy. The author argues we must urgently return to the humanities, to philosophy, classic literature, and history.
Why is reading an old philosophy book a defense against a modern AI algorithm?
Because the humanities teach people how to think, not what to think. When you read history, you see the patterns of tyranny. When you study philosophy, you learn how to deconstruct a logical fallacy.
It gives you mental armor.
A populace that understands history and logic is highly immune to the cheap tricks of demagoguery and algorithmic manipulation. The text brings in the 20th century philosopher of science, Karl Popper, to anchor this point. Popper said that science doesn't advance by proving things absolutely true beyond a shadow of a doubt. It advances by refutation.
By proving things false, discarding the bad ideas, and adjusting the theory.
The author called this approach secular humility. It is the conscious, difficult admission that neither you nor your chosen political party nor your religion holds a monopoly on the absolute truth. It is a willingness to say, I might be wrong, let me hear your evidence.
That genuine humility is the kryptonite of dogmatic, absolute ideology.
But the ultimate rebellion, the most radical thing you can do as an individual against this entire system of control, is contemplation.
Just silence.
The system relies on drowning us in noise, in push notifications, in manufactured outrage, so that we never have a single moment to catch our breath and reflect. Silence is the fundamental enemy of the devouring class.
Because contemplation allows you to reconnect with your own soul, your own inner voice, rather than the identity that the market or the political party has algorithmically assigned to you.
Exactly.
I have to push back on the practicality of this, though. It sounds beautiful in theory. Just go sit in silence and be humble. But how do we actually do this? Our phones are literally engineered by teams of highly paid behavioral psychologists to act like slot machines in our pockets. They are designed to hijack our dopamine receptors. The outrage is addictive. How does an average person working 50 hours a week fight back against $1 billion algorithm?
It is the defining struggle of our time, and the author absolutely acknowledges that it is immensely difficult. You are fighting a war against the most sophisticated persuasion machines ever built. But the rebellion has to start at the micro level. It starts with intentionally reclaiming small pockets of silence.
Give me practical steps.
It means consciously leaving the phone in another room for an hour. It means choosing to read a physical book instead of doom scrolling. Crucially, it means engaging in local face-to-face community.
Just talking to people in real life.
When you interact with people in physical space, volunteering, joining a club, talking to a neighbor over the fence, the spell of online polarization breaks. You realize your neighbor isn't a demon, even if they have a different political sign in their yard. You recognize their humanity.
It's about building a tolerance for uncertainty and ambiguity, isn't it? The system constantly demands that we be absolutely certain, immediately opinionated, and absolutely furious about whatever the topic of the day is. Stepping back and saying, this is complex, I don't know the answer yet, and I need time to think, is an act of profound defiance.
It really is. Reclaiming the real means actively rejecting the synthetic urgencies forced upon us. It means taking the time to slowly, deliberately seek the truth, rather than accepting the prepackaged outrage delivered to our screens.
This has been an incredibly heavy, profoundly fascinating journey. We have covered massive intellectual ground today. We started by looking at how ancient Egyptian pharaohs and Mesopotamian kings claimed the divine right to rule, and traced how that deep human need for structural cosmic meaning evolved over millennia.
We covered a lot of
We
history.
watched the French revolutionaries tear down the Catholic Church, only to tragically worship the guillotine and the cult of reason. We looked at how the 20th century birthed the bloody, totalizing secular religions of communism and fascism, which demanded the surrender of the soul.
And we examined how that historical trajectory has landed us exactly in our current moment. A moment defined by a shattered reality, where AI algorithms and corrupted language trap us in a war of narratives.
It's a lot to take in.
We explored how, in the complete absence of deep spiritual fulfillment, we have allowed rigid political ideology and extreme algorithmic capitalism to become our new theocracies. These systems keep us addicted to outrage, alienated from our labor, and drowning in structural debt, all to the benefit of a devouring class that feeds on our exhaustion.
The core message of The Corruption of the Faithful isn't just a critique about religious people losing their way in a modern world. It's about all of us, regardless of what we believe. It is about how our natural, beautiful, evolutionary human need for profound meaning, for deep connection, and for higher purpose has been hijacked by massive systems of power, profit, and polarization. We have been turned into the raw fuel for a machine that fundamentally does not care about our well-being.
But the critical takeaway is that the machine only works if we keep running on the treadmill. It requires our constant participation. The moment we step off, the moment we reclaim our attention and refuse to be outraged on demand, the illusion begins to crack.
Which leaves us with a final, lingering thought, something I want you to actively mull over today as you go about your life. The author argues that the ultimate weapon against this massive, incredibly well-funded machine of control isn't a violent revolution or electing a new politician or downloading a new mindfulness app. It is simply your own undivided attention and your capacity for silence.
Just silence.
So what happens the next time you are sitting on the couch after a long day and you intentionally leave your phone in the other room? What happens when you turn off the news, shut down the endless feed of manufactured outrage, and just sit with your own thoughts? When the noise finally truly stops, are you ready to meet the person you are when no one is watching you, no one is selling to you, and no one is demanding your anger?
That is the ultimate defining question of our age.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking the hard questions, keep seeking the truth, and we will see you next time.